This is the biblical minimum and maximum age of the earth, a very difficult topic. A little bit about who I work for. I work for Creation Ministries International. We've been producing Creation Magazine for 45 years now, and the Journal of Creation for about 35 years. We write a lot of books. I recently wrote Biblical Geology 101 with Mike Ord, and I'm happy to report that Biblical Biology 101, my first solo authored book, is being laid out right now, and we should have it out to the printers once it's proofread in a couple of months. That's really exciting to have that coming out. So Biblical Geology, Biblical Biology. We've made several movies, two of which have been in theaters. One of those was Alien Intrusion. We've made Evolution's Achilles Heels, which was my brainchild, and I had a whole lot of people helping with this. In fact, the book and the DVD was one of the fastest selling things we ever made, and I'm very happy about that. But it's basically we're attacking evolution, so let's make the evolutionists defend their position with the hardest questions we could ask, and that's a very powerful presentation if you haven't seen it or read it. We also do teaching series like the Genesis Academy. To do this, we actually built a sound studio in our warehouse so that we could film this professionally. And we practiced and practiced and practiced. And then here's the result. An excellent thing. In fact, there's a study guide for this that I wrote that's available on creation.com. Just type in study guide and it'll come right up. It's a 12-part series on the first 11 chapters of Genesis in about 30 to 40-minute segments. In fact, I'll give you a secret. I'm probably not supposed to say this, but we're working on a multi-part series on biblical Egypt. We also have a streaming service on our website. In fact, the first video we ever released was called Historical Adam, Theological Conundrums and Scientific Implications. It's me talking about Y chromosomes and human history and how we all really do go back to a man named Adam. That one is actually free. If you just go to creation.com, click on store, and then you can find the media or streaming or whatever it's called, the button. I'm not sure what the button's called. But it's right there. And there's a bunch of other things there for you also because, people don't really buy a lot of DVDs anymore. So we've converted some of our better products to video online, and anything we make now, we try to do as high quality as possible. And so we can do streaming also. Speaking of Egypt, we had an incredibly successful tour of Egypt. We took 300 people, 100 at a time, on 3 trips. I spent 6 weeks there last September and August, and it was amazing. And we had such an amazing experience and such a positive feedback because the people really loved the way we were presenting things. We said, all right, let's do biblical Israel. Now, a lot of tour companies do Israel, but this September, we're going to be taking another group of people to Israel. It's extremely cost competitive. In fact, you're not going to find a tour for less money, but we're working with locals to get this done. And we're going to do a few different things than your standard tour company might do because, we don't necessarily want to just see places where Jesus was. We want to see things that impact the book of Genesis and deep, deep history. That's there. You can sign up on the website or just go look at the information on creation.com. We also have an email newsletter. I know many of you subscribe to our newsletter, and thank you very much. But if you don't, you just go to creation.com and click on Info Bites. It's right there on the front page, and enter an email address, and we will send you something every Friday. Just a digest of the material that we've been working on, new articles, interviews with people, new ideas in science, and things like that. It's a great way to stay plugged into what we do. All right. So that's enough of an introduction to my ministry, Creation Ministries International. I'm going to tell you that the reason that we do what we do is really because of 1 Peter 3:15. It says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that's in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect." Now, there are times to answer aggressively, and Jesus certainly did that, and so did Paul. But in general, when someone's asking a question, we need to be prepared to answer. And if you want to say that you're a young earth creationist or a biblical creationist or young age creationist, whatever you want to say, you better know what the Bible says on this subject. And this is going to launch into a very technical discussion. Forgive me for all the details I'm about to share with you, but it needs to be done if we really want to know what we're talking about. So I hope you got your notes ready. I'm going to talk fast. I'm going to skip over a couple of subjects that are little tangential subjects that might be interesting but don't directly impact the discussion. And I'll probably point a couple of those out for you that you can study more if you like. This is not a presentation on the scientific evidence for a young universe and a young Earth. If you're new to that, or if you want more information on that, I would highly recommend Don Batten's article, Age of the Earth, on creation.com. 101 evidences for a young age of the Earth and universe. That's a great little summary, bunch of things in there all together. You can read them. So, oh, that's very interesting. In fact, I learned a few things there. But this discussion is on the scriptural evidences for a young age. And this is where we get into the weeds. And I hope you like genealogies and the bagats, and I hope you like numbers, because we're going to have to talk about a lot of them right here. This is based on an article I wrote in the Journal of Creation, which also is a fantastic thing if you'd like to subscribe. The biblical minimum and maximum age of the earth. How old can the earth be scripturally? How young can it be scripturally? Can we know to an exact year? Can we know to an exact day? How about an exact hour? Actually, I'm going to say no, no, and no. However, we can definitely know a range. So I'm going to approach this like a scientist or like an engineer. When I'm given a set of numbers, what accuracy can I derive from that set of numbers? But as soon as we open this topic up, we run into disagreements. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with two of the most influential people in the modern creation movement, Henry Morris and John Whitcomb. Their Genesis flood book was, where would we be without that? So if I contradict them, I do it with trepidation, understanding that some great men have gone before me, and I do this with a little bit of fear here. But in their book, they suggested the Earth is about 10,000 years old. And to do that, they appealed to so-called missing generations. They would look at the generational span of the time that the Israelites were in Egypt, and clearly you can't go from Judah to Moses. There's not enough generations in there to span that gap, so there must be missing generations. Or if you look at Matthew's genealogy compared to Luke's genealogy, Matthew's genealogy has a lot fewer generations, and it's very structured in 3 sets of numbers. So people have concluded that there must be missing generations. I don't necessarily believe that, but that's where they went. And honestly, I would love it if the Earth was 10,000 years old, because that gives me a lot more time for archaeology. I can explain the rise and fall of civilizations, the growth of people, and all sorts of things. The shorter the Earth gets, the more difficult it is to explain all the data that we have. However, if we can explain the data with the youngest possible Earth, then if it happens to be older than we might think today, then fine. That's okay with me. But at one point in time, I'm actually going to shave off 2 centuries that 10 years ago when I write that article, I wouldn't have done that. But today I said, yeah, I think we need to shave off those 2 centuries. But I'll show you where we get there. So we have Whitcomb and Morris. And then we have other great chronologists of the past. Someone like Archbishop Ussher, James Ussher, who wrote Annals of the World in 1654. And he had access to manuscripts that no longer exist. He had historical records we don't have today. He was the Archbishop of Armagh in Ireland, the highest level in the English Church in Ireland. And he famously said that the Earth was created in 4004 BC. Later on, Lightfoot said, I think it was October the 1st at 8 o'clock in the morning or something like that. I probably messed that up. But that wasn't what Ussher said. That was a later edition. But 4004 BC. That's interesting. Consider that he believed that Jesus was born in 4 BC. Oh, he held to a very common view in history where people were taking Earth's history and dividing up into 7 1,000-year periods to reflect the 7 days of creation. And so Jesus is born right at the beginning of one of those periods. That was very convenient for him. And yet other people at the time come up with similar numbers. Johann Kepler, the famous astronomer, gave us 3992 BC. Sir Isaac Newton, probably the greatest scientist who ever lived, but he wrote more about theology than did about science, said about 4000 BC. So we have the greatest minds much greater than me, much smarter than I'm guessing anyone in the room where I'm speaking to. These men were titans of intellect, and they all came up with approximately the same number. But wait a minute, they didn't come up with the same number. And how did they come up with that number? Because if you just read the Bible and add the dates up, you're not going to get the same number. This actually takes a lot of work. And if you go back in history, essentially all of the old church fathers believed that the earth was only thousands of years old. We're talking about Irenaeus, Justin Martyr, Hippolytus, Theophilus, Basil, Augustine, all of them. Now, modern scholars try to say, oh, they thought the earth was really old, and pull some stuff that like Augustine said. And yeah, Augustine did try to non-literalize Genesis. But one of the things he was struggling with was, why did God take so long? 6 days is a long time for an infinite and all-powerful God. See, that's the opposite direction of old earth. It's like instantaneous earth, but he still held to them literally. He would just allegorize on top of it. So he would add an extra level of meaning to the basic text, which, okay, that's interesting, but it wasn't like he was doubting the text. In fact, later on in his life, he wrote a book called The City of God. And one of the chapter titles I have up here, On the Mistaken View of History That Ascribes Many Thousands of Years to the Age of the Earth. So let me ask you, did Augustine believe the earth was really old? Clearly not. And any theologian who tries to say otherwise is either not telling the truth or is unaware of the real data. There was a great article in the most recent Journal of Creation on this subject. I would highly recommend that you read that if you want more information. I'm going to be doing that a lot in this talk. If you want more information, go here. It sure would be nice if we had a family tree of all the people in the world. If we go from Adam and Eve all the way till today. Well, the Bible gives us a family tree of Jesus that goes all the way back to Adam. But as I said earlier, this is contained in Matthew and Luke. And Matthew's genealogy in blue here that wraps around Christ is much shorter than Luke's genealogy. And people have come up with all sorts of ways to answer this. Some people say, oh, one of them is Joseph's genealogy, one of them is Mary's genealogy, even though it doesn't really say that. Some of them say all sorts of things. I have my pet theory, and I really like this. And this is following Machen, who wrote my Greek text that I studied when I learned Koine Greek. And this is following J.I. Packer. Luke's genealogy is actually a genealogy, but Matthew's genealogy is not. It's a list of the rightful kings of Judah. Just like if you looked at the British, all the kings and queens of England, that's not a family tree. When King James became king after Queen Elizabeth died, he wasn't the son of Queen Elizabeth. He wasn't even closely related. He's like a third cousin or something in his long Scottish line. It was, I don't know what the relationship was, but it was not a direct relationship. It's not a family tree. And well, imagine that a man was like 90 years old and he was the rightful king of Judah and he didn't have any sons or grandsons. Well, when he died, what are they going to do? They're going to, well, the brother might be dead and the nephew might be dead, but maybe the grandnephew's alive. Now, the scepter would pass to another branch of the tree and down a couple of generations. You're skipping generations in that case. And that right there might explain some of the shortness of generations. Or maybe Matthew really was stylizing. But either way, I don't think that's a genealogy anymore. I know Lita Kosner, or now Lita Sanders, has written this on several articles on creation.com. In fact, long discussions with her on this. And the first one was a little vague. Second one was a little clearer. And the third one, she actually spelled it out very clearly like I just suggested. But either way, this is not a timeline. This is just a list of names. This does not tell us how old the earth is. So we might turn to something like the Table of Nations in chapter 10, 11 of Genesis. But again, this is not a timeline. This is just from Noah in purple there, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And you can chart all the nations they spread out from Babel. Abraham's down there on the bottom. But that doesn't tell us how long this took or even when this happened. It's just relationships. So I'm a nerd. I really like genealogy, but it's a little disappointing that there's not a time frame on this. What we want is a way to start with Adam and Eve and structure history with real, firm dates. And this is where lots of Bible study is necessary. We need a chronogenealogy, chrono meaning time. And we have that in Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 11. Let me read a passage here from Genesis chapter 5. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them. And he blessed them and named them man when they were created. And here's the kicker. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and he named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Now, the important part is at 130 years when Seth was born. The additional information helps a little bit, not for dating the earth, but for verifying biblical accuracy. We have a birth year, 130, a remainder, 800, and then a checksum, 930. And that's repeated multiple times here in Genesis 5. Now, the mathematical formula in Genesis 11 is a little bit different. But that number 930 means that if you mess up when you're writing numbers, and if you look at manuscripts, one of the most easily corrupted thing amongst manuscripts is the numbers. I don't know why, but numbers were hard to write, and people consistently made mistakes writing numbers in old manuscripts. And that's why textual criticism and looking at original readings is really difficult. This is one of the main reasons is numbers. But we have this number, 130 years. And then the next generation, we have a number, and the next generation, and the next generation. And if you take all that data from Genesis 5 and Genesis 11, you can plot it on a graph like this. Now, in light blue, that's the total lifespan. In dark blue, that's the age of the father when the son is born. Of course, Enoch there is blank because the Lord took him. Notice that Noah is the oldest father recorded in Scripture. And I would love right now to talk about what the age of men does to genetics and the fact that Noah was genetic poison, but you have to look at an article I wrote called Patriarchal Drive. That's another subject for another day. I want to talk about genetics so bad, but no, talking about numbers and genealogy in the Bible. Looking at the first set of numbers, the first 10, the numbers are up and down as if this is not a list of the oldest sons. It's just Noah's genealogy. But in the second set on the right, you got 5 or 6 generations in a row where all the men were born when their father's about 30 years old. That's really interesting. I mean, is that because maybe they were, if you lived a long time, maybe you would delay marriage? Maybe instead of getting married at 20, you get married at 30? Maybe. But it looks like maybe this is a list of oldest sons. Therefore, that might explain how Moses ended up with the genealogical records. Now, sure, God could have dictated to Moses all of the information we have in Genesis. But it's highly likely that Moses was working on records that had been passed down the family. And one way to inherit that is if you're the oldest son of the oldest son of the oldest son of the oldest son. Now, I don't know about Abraham, Isaac. I don't know about Abraham. I don't know about Terah, but we know Isaac and Jacob are both not oldest sons. But it's just a little interesting little tidbit. I could also talk about the decay in lifespan, the science behind that, but we've got to put that aside because we're only looking at the genealogies and the dates. And if you take these and you line them up according to AC or age of creation, after creation. You have BC before Christ, or AC is after creation. We can start with Adam at 0, write down his lifespan. And then when Seth is born when Adam's 130, write his lifespan down. We can do all the way down in blue. Pay attention to the blue first. That is the timeline given to us in our English Bibles. Our Bibles have been translated from the Masoretic text of Hebrew. The Masoretic text has a certain set of numbers, and when you use those numbers, you get Joseph being born, it looks like, around 2300 AC, or after creation. Now, what's the gray? Those are the numbers if you use the Septuagint. That's the Greek translation of the Hebrew, and it was done 250 BC, something like that. Now, these bars overlap. The blue's on top, the gray is underneath the blue, and you can see the gray shifts pretty quickly and goes to the right because someone at some point in history, and we don't know who, we don't know when, changed numbers. The checksums in the Masoretic and the Septuagint are essentially the same, but somebody added 100 years to the age of the father and subtracted from the remainder, or someone subtracted 100 from the father and added to the remainder. We don't know which way it went. It's a long discussion. I don't want to step on too many toes. I know that a lot of people in the creation movement favor the Septuagint. I do not, and there's reasons for that. But I also want to point out the red bars here. That's the Samaritan Pentateuch. That's the first 5 books of the Bible that the Samaritans that we read about in the New Testament were using and have been using for thousands of years now. It's not either of the others. It's very similar to the Masoretic in Genesis 5, but it's very similar to the Septuagint in Genesis 11. There's a couple of shavings of time, which is why the bars drift to the left. And then when it picks up with the Septuagint style, it quickly increases to the right until it almost gives the same result. But the Samaritan Pentateuch is not the original. It's clearly a recension. I mean, they change it to say that the temple's on Mount Ebal instead, or Mount Samaria instead of in Jerusalem, and they harmonize a lot of things. Like Genesis 5 and 11, they had to use the same mathematical formula in both of them. But in our Bibles, in the Septuagint, it's not that way. But I'm just saying, there's 3 main textual families that we have. I'm strongly in favor of the Masoretic. And if you have more questions about that, and you have not really dug into it, here's a list of 7 articles I've written over years on very detailed, asking questions. And I want to tell you, I was willing to be persuaded. When I first started studying Septuagint, I said, okay, let's find out if this is the original or the Masoretic is, and if we can know the difference. And the more and more and more and more I looked, the less persuaded I was. I do not believe that the Septuagint numbers are the originals. I kind of wish they were, because I would like to have an extra 1,300 years of Earth's history. For the reason I said before, because we can add a lot more archaeology. We don't have to collapse all these civilizations and things in very short periods of time. Now, I think we can. It's just, man, it would just be that much easier if I had another 1,000 or so years. But I just can't go there. Okay, that's there for you. If you're a Septuagint advocate, God bless you. I hope I didn't insult you too bad. I was trying not to, but I have reasons for the position I landed on. So we're talking about timelines in history. And it would be nice to have a rough timeline. This is a rough biblical timeline. I'm rounding off all the numbers here. Creation's about 4,000 BC. Flood's about 1,600 years later. And Abraham, interesting, lived right about 2,000 BC. Moses lived about 1,500 BC. David literally lived in the year 1,000. Now, Jesus, of course, at 0, and today we're in 2023. But those are some really nice numbers to know. And for most of my Christian walk, I did not know this. I literally had to sit down and think, okay, when did these people live? How are they related to each other? And when I saw the 2,000, 1,500, 1,000 pattern there, I was like, oh, that's really cool. I can remember that. But interestingly, Moses lived in the Bronze Age. Oh, how long are those ages anyway? Are those thousands of years? No, actually, they're dozens to hundreds of years. And some places skipped over some of these ages entirely. David lived in Iron Age 2, I think 2A even. So these ages are not long periods of time, and really they only apply to the Levant. That's the western section of the Middle East bordering the Mediterranean. You can't talk about the Chinese Bronze Age. It's not the same as the Middle Eastern Bronze Age, but they did go through a Bronze period, but etc. Now, the destruction of Troy, those ancient, I mean, before even Greece, the Greek city-states were formed in the form that we recognize. We had the Trojan Wars. That was during the period of the Judges. Or we had Esther's king invading Greece, or actually no, it's Peloponnesian Wars between Sparta and Athens. And we had Esther's king invading Greece. This is the time of the divided monarchy, or soon afterwards. It's really cool when you put historical events into a biblical history. They fit. There's really neat because it puts everything in relation to one another. Now, I'm going to tell you that Egyptian history is a major challenge because they claim that if you just look at Egyptian history, well, the pyramids would be built before the flood. And some Septuagint advocates go to Septuagint because if you use the Septuagint numbers, the pyramids would not be built before the flood. But no, the dating of the pyramids is wrong. It's quite clear. The problems in Egyptian history are in the earliest periods, not the Greek period, not the Persian period, not the Roman period, not even the New Kingdom period. We've got all the pharaohs of the New Kingdom. We know how long they reigned and things like that. It's the earliest periods that are the most problematic, and most of the dates are based on carbon dating, which the closer you get to the flood, the more off the carbon dates are, the more older they appear artificially. You can look up how carbon dating works on creation.com. That's a really fun article I wrote. It took me a long time to write that one. Okay, to get at the timeline now, let's make a timeline. You ready? Got your thinking caps on? Because here we go. I'm not going to stop. A quick romp through all of biblical history. We have creation. After creation, we have what's called the antediluvian. That's before the flood. Antediluvian period. That's attested to in Genesis, especially Genesis chapter 5. Then we have Noah's flood, 1 year flood. And then we have the patriarchal period. This is Shem to Abraham. And then we have Abraham's grandson Jacob takes his family and they all go into Egypt. And they're in Egypt for a couple of centuries. That's called the Sojourn. And then they come out of Egypt at this famous event that everyone's familiar with called the Exodus. God parts the Red Sea, the Israelites walk through. That's the Exodus. After the Exodus, they wander in the desert for 40 years. They invade Canaan, they conquer it. And then we have the period of the Judges, which is very hard to date, by the way. And then eventually we have King Saul, then King David, and then King Solomon, who builds the temple in Jerusalem. An extremely important date in world history. Then we have the divided monarchy period, because in Solomon's son's Rehoboam's day, basically there was a big civil war, and the northern tribes, what we call Israel, split off from the southern tribes that we call Judah. And so we have this divided monarchy. And if you've ever tried to make a list of all the kings and a couple of queens of Israel and Judah and figure out how they line up, it's incredibly difficult. It's fun to do, but it's hard. After that, we have the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. And then we have the Jews coming back. We've got a couple of prophets in there. And then we have 400 silent years where there's no biblical books written. This is the period of the Maccabees in the Apocrypha. And then we have the birth of Christ. Now, I'll put a date there, 4 BC in blue. I don't know that Jesus is born in 4 BC, but that's a typical thing that people will say. And they argue 4 BC, 3 BC, 2 BC. I don't know what the actual date is. But in order to date the world, I don't need to know that. And I don't need to use Daniel's prophecies to figure out when Christ is going to be born and then go backwards to their time in Babylon. No, but I do have a historical peg, and this is important. We need something that is very accurately dated. We know what year it happened. And if the Bible attests to it, and if science attests to it, we can say, okay, here's a real event in the Bible. And from that, we can start building our chronology. And that is the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. 2 Chronicles 36. And they burned the house of God and broke down the walls of Jerusalem and burned all its palaces with fire and destroyed all its precious vessels. This was very well attested to in... Well, what am I doing? Why is this happening? Stop. Sorry, did I go backwards? Oh, well, what happened? Oh, I forgot to turn off the animation. I'm going to have a lot of these slides. For each one of these steps, I'm going to have to do that again. The destruction of the temple in secular archaeology happened in 586 or 587 BC. Archaeologists do not debate this. It's written about in the Babylonian records and is written about in the scriptural records. So we can take their date, say, okay, that's when the temple was destroyed. Now, if you want to figure out the period of divided monarchy, you're going to have to figure out, I know Thiele and Jones and even Archbishop Ussher, they did a lot of work on this. They did some good work. And a lot of ambiguities have been whittled down over years. And they're really close to having it, everyone's agreeing on a specific number. But you got to deal with things like which new year did they use? Because one of the kingdoms used was it Rosh Hashanah or is it Yom Kippur? What? Okay, what? I'm sorry, I just forget for a second. That's in the fall, and that's the Jewish New Year. But the other Jewish New Year is in the spring at Passover. Which one did they use? They use different ones, and apparently they use different ways of counting their years for the. So you say like in the third year of King Omri, what does that mean? Is his first year counted year zero? Like we say a child isn't 1 year old until they've lived for 12 months, but their first year is those first 12 months. And what are we talking in like calendar years? Like what if he started serving in August and then New Year happened in September or October? What is that month or two? Does that count as the year? That was his first year. He served in that year. And now in October, that's his second year of serving. Yes, they were doing that, which means that kings would have been sharing regnal years. And it makes it really hard to get through that. But we don't need that. Because in the fifth year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem and took away the treasures of the house of the Lord. Now, a lot, especially liberal scholars, say this is not King Shoshank of Egypt. Can't be. In fact, David Roll says no, cannot be because David Roll has a late Exodus date and about 1225 under Pharaoh Ramses, which I don't believe. But if that's true, there's not enough time for the wandering, the conquest, and the period of the judges, and then the kings up to King Rehoboam here to get to 986 BC, the building of the temple in 986 BC. So I'm going to say, nope, I'm going the other way here. Sorry about all these thingies. This is kind of weird. But we can use that as a historical peg also and skip over all the divided monarchy difficulties. And then we turn to 1 Kings 6:1. We learn that in the fourth year of Solomon's reign, this month of Ziv, the second month, he began to build the house of the Lord. Oh, look at that. So we can use all these dates to start saying this is when the temple was first beginning to be built. And now we have a date of 986 BC. So there's a lot of math that I'm skipping over because I can't share it with you. It's tables and you have to think through and use your calculator and do a bunch of adding and things like that. And it's not worth it. I just want to say, if you do all that math, you come up with the temples built in 986 BC. But before that, we had the period of the judges. How long was that? Well, if you add up the reigns of all the judges, you get a period that's too long. Clearly, the judges, some of them were contemporaneous with one another, maybe one in the north and one in the south. And when it says Israel had rest, while the judge lived, and after he died, trouble came back. Well, that might just only be in that locality. I don't like saying that. It makes me a little uncomfortable, but there's too many years there. But how long is the judge's period? Well, look at this one. This is the judge Jephthah talking to the king of the Ammonites who has invaded the Israelite territory on the east side of the Jordan. This is Reuben, the half tribe of Manasseh. And was Gad over there also? I don't remember. But the Israelites who decided they want to live there and they didn't cross over into Canaan, they were there for a long time. And so Jephthah says, well, Israel lived in Heshbon and his villages, and Aroer and his villages, and all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon. 300 years. Why did you not deliver them within that time? He just said, dude, we've been here for 300 years. This isn't your land. Well, how accurate is that 300 number? Is that like the difference between 299 and 301, or is that about 3 centuries? Yeah, that's tough, but we can solve this also. Because again, 1 Kings 6:1. In the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, that's when Solomon started building the temple. So we skip over the period of the judges. We go straight to the temple building. That means that the Exodus was in 1446 BC. You see what we're doing here? We're drilling down, trying to get to the date of creation, but we have to do all these milestones in the process. And that 1446, you hear that a lot. A lot of people will say that. I don't think it was necessarily exactly 1446. There's already ambiguities. There's already some wiggle room in here, but it could have been 1446. It's about then to within a couple of years. I don't even think it's a decade off. It's right about then. But now we have a rather awkward discussion, and that is, how long were the Israelites in Egypt? Oh my! And I'm going to tell you, I've changed my mind on this. When I wrote the biblical minimum age of the earth, maximum age of the earth, I assumed that they were in Egypt for 430 years. And yeah, I heard that some people believe there's only 215 years. Like, okay, well, yeah, whatever. And I included that for the sake of completion, but I didn't believe it. Well, 10 years later and a lot more studying, I've changed my mind. So let's walk through this carefully. I don't want to insult anyone or, again, step on toes unnecessarily. And if you want to say 430, fine. But the question is, how long were the Israelites in Egypt? This is called the sojourn. One thing that tipped me another direction was when I looked at the genealogies that span their time in Egypt. Now, see on the left it says Canaan, Egypt, Exodus, and on the bottom Israel. These are people that were born in or lived in Canaan or in Egypt or were alive during the Exodus, maybe died during the Exodus, or made it into Israel on the bottom in red. Well, that middle section in blue, there's a lot of people that we have their family trees. In fact, going from the tribe of Joseph, Judah, Levi, and Reuben, we have family trees of people that go right through the sojourn. I'm a genealogist. I've been studying my family tree for 30 or more years now. And I don't tell you, it's hard. Genealogy is extremely difficult. Record keeping, inaccuracies in records. But if I had missing generations in my genealogy, I wouldn't know which way was up. I would not be able to complete it. And when I drew this tree of all these family trees that go through their sojourn and connect to one another horizontally, I don't think this could be built if they're skipping generations. I think, as the Australians that I work with say, it would be a dog's breakfast. It'd just be a complete mess. And yet there it is. And you can build that family tree if you want. You go through all the numbers and names and draw it. And that means that's real data. Oh, I love this. Is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Very obscure. 1 Chronicles 4:22. And Jocham and the men of Kozibah and Joash and Seraph, who, my face is over that, and Moab, and returned to Laham. Now the records are ancient. Every time I read that, I laugh. Because what we have here is a chronicler who's struggling with genealogy. He's trying to take all these records and put them into one document. He's pulling his hair out because it's so frustrating because the records are ancient. And my friends, I think you probably think similarly when you're reading all the begats and how old this person was and who's related to whom. And then you have Chronicles and it says it all again and it repeats all this information. There's so many names, and yeah, the names actually are fascinating. It's just there's a lot of information. Let's just say it that way. Look at Genesis 15. God talking to Abram, soon to be named Abraham. Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there. And they will be afflicted for 400 years. Very important. And they shall come back in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. God just told Abraham that his descendants are going to be in a foreign land and then they're going to eventually come back. And he said they will be afflicted for 400 years and will come back in the 4th generation. Yeah. What's a generation? I don't think they had a concept a generation equals 30 years. No. I'm not sure what that means in their understanding. Interesting, though, that family tree I just showed you that spans the sojourn is like 4 generations in Moses' lineage. Anyway, just saying, not in Joshua's lineage. On the far left there, there's a lot more generations in Joshua's lineage. But this is also kind of expected, because in any population, you're going to have the oldest child of the oldest child of the oldest child of the oldest child of the oldest child. who has as most generations as possible. And you can have the youngest child of the youngest child of the youngest child, where everyone is spaced out as much as possible. That's a natural outcome of any natural population. Just putting that out there. Okay, 400 years. And then we have in Exodus 12. The time the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. That's not the same as that 400 number. Was God just giving Abraham a round number? And now we have 430, a more specific number. Now we have two significant figures instead of one? Possibly. But notice also the asterisk. The asterisk there is indicating a textual difference between the Masoretic and the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch also. The Septuagint adds "and in Canaan." The time the people of Israel lived in Egypt and in Canaan was 430 years. Oh, they're indicating the clock, the 400 clock, started with Abraham, not when Jacob entered Egypt. So if Jacob entered Egypt and it's 430 years, they were there for 430 years. But if it started with Abraham, they're only there for about 215 years. And that's where the long versus a short sojourn argument comes from. But I, of course, don't agree with Septuagint, but look at Galatians 3. There's another thing that tipped me in this direction. This is Paul. Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. He did not say, and to offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, to your offspring, who is Christ. This is what I mean. The law, which was given 430 years afterwards, does not annul a covenant previously ratified by God so as to make the promise void. Okay. Focus on the law was given 430 years after what? After the promise was made to Abraham and to his offspring, according to Paul, who is Jesus. So he's not talking about Isaac or Jacob. Yeah, the promises were repeated to Isaac and to Jacob. Fine. But you have to at least include Abraham in that formula. And therefore, the 430 years, according to Paul, starts with Abraham. Now, was Paul influenced by the Septuagint? Well, he definitely read the Septuagint. He definitely read Greek, and we have a lot of Septuagint quotes in the New Testament. But Paul would have, because he was training to be a Pharisee, would have also been very familiar with the Hebrew. And he would have known the difference. And he definitely would have known that textual difference existed. And yet he said it this way. And once he said it that way, it becomes Scripture. There might be a way around this. I haven't been able to think of one because it really does sound like Paul saying the clock starts ticking with Abraham, this 430-year clock. Now, why is it 430, not 400? Well, some people have suggested that the promise was made to Abraham when he's 75, and then Isaac is born when Abraham is 100, and Isaac would have been weaned at about the age of 5. That's about 30 years. From 75 to 105 is about 30 years, and therefore, both the 400 and the 430 are true. It's 430 years from when the promise was made, and it's 400 years from when Ishmael mocked Isaac. Did I get the names right? Yeah. Ishmael mocked Isaac. Ah, interesting. Now, I don't think that's actually true, but that's where the 415 comes from. Here's something else. If you look at the genealogy of Moses and his brother Aaron and his sister Miriam, they descend from Jacob and Jacob and Levi and Kohath. Now, Levi and Kohath were both born before the Israelites got to Egypt. And after that, Levi had Jochebed, Moses' mother, and Kohath had Amram, Moses' father. Yeah, so Moses' father married his aunt. That happens all the time in the Bible. Creepy today, but it happened. This span I'm showing here, that's a 430-year span from when they enter to when they leave. Because we know Moses is 80 years old when he left, and Miriam, Aaron, we know how old they were when they died out in the wilderness. You cannot span that with a 430-year interval. There's not enough generations, which is why people think that there are missing generations. But in the 215-year sojourn, not only do the generations mesh, there's room to spare. That's the wiggle room I added to those things. Yeah, you can do it easily. So all of a sudden, this isn't the problem again. And again, I'm leaning away from missing generations. I wish they were there because then the Earth is older, but I don't have any reason for believing that. Now, that means that I'm going to put two numbers up here for the entry into Egypt. The short sojourn, it's about 1661. The long sojourn, it's about 1876. Now, I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers up, but 1661, actually, the number to know is 1446 Exodus. That's really the number you should know. 986 BC for the building temple, 586 for destroying the temple. Okay, fine, but 1446 is a very important number in history because that's how we can tie biblical and Egyptian history together, interestingly. Now, we go through the patriarchal period by using Genesis 11 and all the ages of the men when their sons are born. We go through the flood, it's about a year. We go through the antediluvian period using the record in Genesis 5, when all the men are born and how old they are and when their sons are born. And that gives us a date of creation. Oh, but here's where the 215 years comes from. If Abraham's 75 when he leaves Haran, 25 years later, Isaac is born. 60 years later, Jacob is born. And when Jacob is 130, he enters Egypt. Well, 25 plus 60 plus 130 is 215 years. Therefore, 215 years from the promise made to Abraham plus 215 years in Egypt equals 430 years. Only that's not true because the promise was not made to Abraham when he was in Haran. He moved to Canaan, moved further south. He rescued Lot. There was a famine. He went to Egypt. He came back from Egypt, and that's when God made the promise. But the promise is undated. We don't know how old he was. He was somewhere between 75 and I guess 90, somewhere in there. So that means that it's not 215 years before Egypt. It's less than that. Therefore, it's more than 215 years in Egypt. The 215-year short sojourn is actually a mathematical mistake that most people don't realize. It's longer than 215, or it's 430. That's the two options. Hope you're okay with that? All right. Am I talking too fast or too many numbers for you? If you add up all the numbers in the patriarchal period, you get a flood year of about 2349 BC. About. If you add up all the numbers in the antediluvian period, you get a creation of about 4005 BC. Archbishop Ussher would not have gotten his 4004 BC number if he didn't use a short sojourn. Oh, that 2349 for the flood and 4005 creation, that's assuming a short sojourn. When I realized that, my jaw hit the floor. It's like, what? He actually believed that? I said. Then I realized that most of the chronologers do. Like, oh, okay. Except he was absolutely wrong. That is not the date of creation. It's not the date of creation. Or if it is, it's just by dumb luck because there's all sorts of things we still haven't accounted for. There, in any given set of numbers, there's an implied precision. I mean, if I take a tape measure and measure something, I can measure down to a 16th of an inch. But if I get out a micrometer, I can measure down to 10,000th of an inch. Well, which thing did I use? And we're given the dates in Genesis. We're given how old a guy is when his son is born. And are we talking about a zero-based system or one-based system? In other words, is Adam in his 130th year when Seth is born? Or is he 130 years old when Seth is born? That's a year difference. That's 129 or 130. And Seth is not born on his birthday. He's born sometime during that year, which means there's a plus or minus 6 months with every single date statement. And there are 20 generations between Adam and Abraham. That's plus or minus 10 years just from that. We also have to worry about what calendar system they're using. How do you define what a year is? Is that a tropical year or a sidereal year? Is that a set of 12 lunar months or months? Well, 12 lunar months is 11 days short of a calendar year. You know, the length of the year is really, really hard to figure out. The length of a day is easy. The length of a month is easy. but the number of days in a month isn't equal, and the number of months in a year isn't equal. Um, ouch. And then we have to worry about rounding and ratcheting, and the dates that are given to us, they're not the year of creation. It's just how old the Father is. And therefore, there's always wiggle. And every single generation, we get more and more wiggle in the numbers. Consider this. This is my family tree. And this is a phenomenon I call date slippage. If you look at my, see, I'm there, my great-great-great-grandfather, William Thomas Carter. He was born in Ireland in about 1840, and his family fled the Irish potato famine in 1845, went to England, and then went to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My great-great-grandfather, William Thomas Carter, was born in Philadelphia in 1859. My grandfather, I guess, no, my great-grandfather, William Thomas Carter, was born in 1889. My grandfather was born in 1914, my dad in 1937. I was born in 1968, and my son was born in 2005. Now, if you look at the third column there, year span, there's a 30-year difference, and then 25, a 25, a 31, and a 37. So if you look at the birth year of the person on the top and my son, that's 146 years. If you add up the span of years in all those people, you also get 146. But if you look at how old the fathers were when the son is born, you get different numbers. Because every time a son is born in a calendar year, prior to the father's birthday, the father hasn't yet gone up to that age. He's a year younger than you would think. So you lose years. In fact, in simple illustration, these 5 generations, I lost 2 years. So because the ages given to us in Genesis are age of the father, every time a son is born before the father has had his ratchet up to the next year level, the date we calculate for creation slips behind the real date for creation. It's not 4004 BC. It can't be. Given 20 generational steps, okay, it's possible that, maybe Adam is made on January 1st, and then Seth is born on January 2nd, and the next generation is born on January 3rd, and you never have a son born before the father's birthday. But no, that's not the way reality works. And probabilistically, you're almost certain we've lost a couple of years. So it's not 4004, 4005, it's longer than that. But also, looking at the numbers, we get some very strange results. This is a histogram of the final numbers in the ages of these patriarchs. Just looking at the green, that's Adam to Mahalalel. That's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 generational steps. All the numbers end in 0 or 5, and there's 1, 2, and I think that might be Enoch. I don't remember. I think that might be Enoch. But essentially, all the numbers end in a 0 or a 5. That's not random. That is not a random distribution. There's something weird happening with these numbers. Or were they rounding off? I mean, if I'm 501 years old, do I really care if I'm 501? Am I just rounding off to the nearest 5? Or maybe they're ratcheting. Maybe I'm 500. Next year, I'm still 500. Next year, I'm 505. Okay, now I'm 505. Twist my arm. I'm 505. That would be a 0 and a 5 thing. Or maybe they're using a lunar calendar. Because if you think about it, it's really easy to count time in months and hard to count time in years. And Adam, I don't think he was given all knowledge. I think he would have had to figure out the calendar, and maybe they just had a lunar system. And it just so happens that 60 lunar months, and 60 is a very important number in the ancient world, but 60 lunar months is almost 5 years. So maybe Moses took a numerical system different than his system. When the lunar solar calendar was given to Moses at the Exodus. That's when God said, this is where the year starts on Passover, and here's how long the year is. They actually used leap months. The priests would go out in the field and look at the grain. If it wasn't ready to harvest, it wasn't springtime yet, and so every once in a while they add an extra month. Okay, everyone, Passover is going to be next month, and had leap months every once in a while, and that's how they kept the calendar in sync with the seasons. Well, back before that, though, we don't know what system they were using. And there's just too many zeros and fives here. So ratcheting, rounding, lunar calendar, any of those things could explain it. There's something weird happening. I don't think this is random. And then tangentially, if you look at the Sumerian king list, those kings were living tens of thousands of years. And after the flood, all of a sudden they only lived for 1,000 years. Very dramatic drop. Unlike the Bible, we have a small, slow drop. But the Sumerian kings, all the numbers are divisible by 60. There's something mathematical happening, as if maybe they were taking an ancient document that was written in a different numerical system and they made a mistake and they just translated it straight. Just like Columbus, when he went to sail around the world or sail to China, the scholars of the day said, "You are going to die. You cannot make it. China is further away than you think." Of course, everyone believed the earth is round, not flat. That's not true. Everyone thought the earth was round, but the scholars are right and Columbus was wrong because he had a manuscript written in Arabic or something like that. And it wasn't using his unit of measure, it was using an Arabic unit of measure. And it's about the difference today between miles and kilometers. He thought his world was only 60% the true size of the world. So when he got to the New World, he thought he was in China. He wasn't. The world was bigger. I think that might explain the Sumerian king list. And something weird is happening. It's just fun. In other words, we can't know it to an exact year because of the numbers. But look at Genesis 7:11. The 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, the 17th day of the month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. That's the start of the flood. Genesis 8:14. In the second month, the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Oh, cool. We have the second month, 17th day of the month, and a year later, the second month, the 27th day of the month. How long were they on the ark? It sounds like a year and 10 days, right? No, because the time is in monthly increments. We're talking about months in Noah's life. And 12 months and 10 days is only 1 day short of a solar year. It looks like they were on the earth for 1 year. Maybe, were they really using a lunar system? I don't know, but there's a hint of that right there. Oh, that's crazy. In other words, I don't know what the answer is. All right. One final thing. We have to deal with some additional ambiguities. We don't know how old Shem was, how old Noah was when Shem was born. Noah's 500 years old when Shem, Ham, and Japheth are born. They're not triplets. It's after that. In fact, we had the same formula with Terah. When Terah's three sons, Abraham being one of them, were born, it just lists them and how old he was. I don't know how old Terah was when Abraham was born, but the next generation after Shem is Arphaxad, and he's born 2 years after the flood. Okay, so we can date the flood, we can skip Shem entirely, and now we can date his son. Except what does 2 years after the flood mean? Is it 24 months after the flood? Is it like if the flood happened in April, would the next April be 2 years? The second April will be 2 years after the flood? And is it the start of the flood or the end of the flood? I imagine it's the end of the flood, but we're not specifically told. So there's a couple of years of ambiguity right there. And Abraham, we're not told that Abraham left Haran when Terah died. He could have left before Terah died. Sarah has to be of marrying age, so she has to be at least like 15. And he's 10 years older than her, so he's got to be at least 25. Okay. Or they could have left after Terah died. All we know, he's 75 years old when he leaves. So he's got to leave within 74, and we know that he was alive before they got to Haran. So that's a 75-year ambiguity right there. For the age of the universe. And I don't know what the answer is, and I don't think anyone does. So because of all that, we can have this ugly table, and I forgot to draw lines. But on the left, we have the Masoretic, the Septuagint, the Samaritan Pentateuch, and on the bottom, LXX, that's the Septuagint. We have short sojourn, long sojourn, short, long. And then the lunar minimum, if they're only using a lunar calendar until the Exodus. Then we have the second column from the right. That's if you just add up the numbers. So that 4005 number is there. But then if you have a long sojourn, it's longer. But if you use a Samaritan Pentateuch, you get a different number. If you use a Septuagint, you get a different number. If you take all the smallest possible errors, you get the minimum column. If you take the maximum possible errors, you get the maximum column. So how old is the Earth? I don't think you can know to a specific year because the numbers aren't given to us in specific years. The Bible is not a chronology book. The purpose of the Bible is to point people to Jesus Christ. The purpose of the Bible is it's basically it's a history of God finding a bride for his son. That's what the Bible's all about. It does talk about chronology, and it's not wrong when it talks about chronology, but because its purpose is not chronology, we can't date the creation down to a day or even a year. However, and this is very important, imprecision does not equate to error. Just because it's an imprecise number doesn't mean there's error. It just means that's the precision of the number. Scientists and engineers have to deal with this all the time. It's not an error. Ambiguities are also not error. It's simply something we don't know. It's this or that or something else. Okay, within a range of possibilities. It's not an error. It's just something we can't know. So I conclude, the Bible gives us a gap-free chronology with limited precision that allows us to date the creation to something more than 4000 BC. Not 5000, let's use the Septuagint. The greatest difference right there is the Septuagint. That's plus or minus 1300 years. The second greatest difference is the length of the Sojourn. That's plus or minus 215 or more years. After that, we're talking about trivial little things that hardly matter at all. And even we take the worst case scenario, you're still going to get about 4000, 4100 maybe BC. That's our range. And that's the best range that I can give to you. So I'm going to leave you with John 3:12. If I've told you earthly things and you do not believe, how can you believe heavenly things? One of the things that we struggle with when sharing Christianity, Jesus, the gospel with people is skepticism about the veracity of the Bible. And the age of the earth is a big deal for a lot of people because they assume the universe is billions of years old. That's what they've always been told. Now, the Holy Spirit has to do work in a person's heart before they can start understanding the Bible. That's a given. And yet, if we know our stuff and we can defend the reasons why we say the earth is so old, it's a much better approach than, well, I'm not really sure. It could be longer. It could be shorter. That's not a really good defense. And people realize you're squirming and you're not confident about what the Bible actually says. How can we be confident about what it means? All right. There you have the biblical minimum and maximum age of the earth. Please go to creation.com and learn more. I don't know what your time schedule is. I got 9:50 on my clock, so it's 7:50 on your clock. We started a little early. Were you planning on questions? I don't know. I basically filled up a whole hour just there.
That's kind of up to you, Rob. I know it's late there. Do you want to take some questions or not?
No, I do this for a living. I love questions, and I'm here for you.
Okay, we'll take.
I'm not in a hurry.
We'll take a few questions then, if you're okay with it.
Okay.
It's green. Okay, now it's coming through. You use 1 Kings 6:1 to mention the 480 years prior to the starting of the building of the temple by Solomon, and you date that in all of your charts to 1446 BC. But in one of the charts, you list the date of there is 1446. Here is a chart where you say 986 BC. There's another one where you say 966 BC, which is correct. Subtract 480 from 1446, and it should be 966.
Yeah, because I'm bad at math and I make mistakes. In fact, Judy corrected my math in this article, and I went back and had to fix it. And then I had the web team take the static pictures of the charts and actually make them into HTML so we could. I probably just have a typo on the slide. It's 430 years from
480 years.
480 years from 986
to the beginning of the building of the temple.
Yeah, it's 966.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound right though.
Well, that's 480.
I know the 1446. That's the classic Exodus date. So 480 from there would, I guess, be 966. Yes. And I bet I fixed it on one of these slides and not on this one, because I know that sometime yesterday afternoon I typed in a 966 somewhere, and we might have seen it today and just didn't notice it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being willing to do this.
Thank you.